This weather is going to continue to be seasonably cold this weekend with lows in the 30s, but a low-pressure system may be bringing some precipitation early next week. I'm Ray Auger, and that's the weather.
Oh, Ray, how many times do you get the weather wrong around here?
Hey, man, I just report it. I don't predict it. Don't shoot the messenger.
No, I get that. Well, this week we're going to travel back to the 1880s and meet a man who did get a bold weather prediction spot on.
Well, who's that?
His name is Levi Beebe, and folks of western Massachusetts called him the weather prophet of Beartown Mountain. I'm Jeff Belanger.
And I'm Ray Auger, and welcome to episode 23 of the New England Legends podcast. All right, Jeff, there's an old expression in New England. If you don't like the weather...
Yeah, just wait a minute and it'll change. We've all heard that one.
Right. So how could a guy in the 1880s, without Doppler radar or computer models, get it right? Maybe he was just lucky?
Well, we should set this up.
I agree.
Levi Beebe was born in Richmond, Massachusetts in 1817. As a youngster, he learned the paper-making trade at the Plattner and Smith Mill in Lee. But problems with his health forced Beebe to give up the work, so he bought 2,000 acres of land on Beartown Mountain in the Berkshires. There he ran a sawmill, and in his spare time, he studied the weather. For 35 years, he made observations and predictions, and his legend grew.
Well, that was another time, wasn't it?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, back then, you could run a sawmill and be a scientist. You could contribute to scientific fields, even if you're not a PhD or professor. Today, we're told you have to have the right background if you want to work in science.
It's true that Levi Beebe was free to explore as he wished. He was judged only by his results, and many locals in western Massachusetts and beyond took those results as gospel.
So what made this guy so special?
His biggest accomplishment was predicting the blizzard of 1888 to the day.
Now, historically speaking, that storm was a doozy. A lot of folks today still hear about the blizzard of 1978 that dumped over 27 inches of snow on Boston. But that storm is nothing compared to the magnitude and toll of the blizzard of 1888. Meteorologists refer to that storm as the Great White Hurricane. It left 400 people dead in its wake.
My God, what happened?
Well, the storm began on March 11th, 1888. We're talking about the tail end of winter, so folks aren't expecting much from snowstorms anymore. In fact, in the days leading up to that storm, it had been unseasonably warm. The storm began as rain, but soon temperatures dropped rapidly. Just after midnight on March 12th, the rain turned to snow. This nor'easter was the likes of which no one had ever seen before. Connecticut and Massachusetts were hit the hardest. The winds roared at a sustained speed of 45 miles per hour, with gusts over 80, as foot upon foot of snow fell. By the time the storm passed on March 14th, parts of New England received as much as 50 inches of snow, with drifts over 30 feet high. Some houses and buildings were completely covered in snow.
What was the cleanup like?
Well, the cleanup was a huge problem. And this is where the death toll comes into play. Temperatures were really cold in the aftermath of the storm. Daytime temps were around 9 degrees Fahrenheit.
So there's no quick melt.
Along the shores and harbors, 200 ships either grounded or wrecked, resulting in the loss of 100 sailors. In the cities and major metropolitan areas, it took 8 days to dig out from the drifts and allow some sort of transit again. But in the less populated areas, it took even longer. Imagine an elderly couple living in their little homestead in the Berkshires of Massachusetts. Now, there's no way for neighbors or relatives to get to them. If there's not enough firewood or food inside, they died. And stories like that accounted for 300 more deaths.
The worst part about the death toll in a storm like this is that very few likely die in the storm, except for those poor sailors who perished with their ships. For those snowed in, death would have been slow, freezing to death or starving. It must have been awful.
This storm stands as the worst nor'easter to ever hit New England.
But one guy, Levi Beebe, called this storm months before it happened. Those who listened to Beebe and his predictions knew to stock up on food and fuel before the blizzard hit. He said in the autumn of 1887 that a terrible storm would hit on March 12th.
Well, how'd he do it? Today, our weather forecasts are good for a few days out at best. Sometimes you can see a 10-day or even a 14-day forecast, but most of us don't put much stock in those once you're talking beyond 72 hours. How does he get it right months in advance?
Levi Beebe explained his theories in a booklet he published on New Year's Day, 1891. His work is titled Meteorology: How to Foretell the Weather for All Time in All Parts of the World.
Now, that might be the boldest, most audacious title of a meteorology book I've ever heard.
I know, right? But then I guess who'd buy a book called Meteorology? Your best guess.
Not me, but again, I just report the weather. I don't predict it.
I know. We won't shoot the messenger. Okay, so as to how Levi Beebe made his predictions, he had one instrument that he valued above all others.
Greylock is my barometer.
Greylock? As in Mount Greylock in the Berkshires of Western Mass?
The very same.
Air currents. When I predicted weather on Beartown Mountain in Lee, old Greylock was my barometer, 38 miles to the north. I could determine from it how high our atmosphere was filled with gases, wet or dry. I concluded all the different weather conditions and changes were caused by the different currents in our atmosphere. There is ground current, a middle current, and an upper current. By watching their interplay and direction, you can tell almost exactly what the weather will be from an hour ahead to several days.
So he's observing the winds around Greylock and discovers patterns. I'm sure there could be something to that, helping you forecast the coming days. But months ahead? How would he do that?
To foretell the seasons, take the last 20 days of March, the last 20 days of June, the last 20 days of September, and the last 20 days of December. As the different air currents move through each of these days, so will they continue to move during each of the seasons almost invariably.
Wait, really? This is starting to sound like some old wives' tale.
Take the last 20 days of December. If the snow accumulates and cold hardens it, we expect a cold winter. But if the snow goes off 2 or 3 times, we expect a broken winter. These conditions apply to all seasons relatively. If these days are cold and we have storms, or warm and dry, clear, or cloudy, so we may expect to find the rest of the season. As the Earth flies and turns through space, it creates electric gases, which affect these changes.
Well, this sounds like pseudoscience at best.
Well, that may be, but there's also some truth in it. Historic weather patterns are a huge part of modern-day forecasting. We now have computer models for many thousands of storms. We can look at the data and see what the conditions were like that led to these storms. Levi Beebe noticed his own bellwethers around Mount Greylock.
And folks in Western Mass listen to this guy?
They sure did. And the farmers came to swear by his advice and predictions.
If we place a stone under the corner of a fence when the moon is growing, the grass will grow under it. If laid when the moon is waning, the grass dies and the stone settles much sooner. This effect may have something to do with seeds starting when planted. I have had the best crops by getting my seed in the ground when the moon is waxing.
The crazy thing is, in modern times, it's been shown in a laboratory setting that seeds exposed to polarized light, similar to that given off by the moon, grow faster than those not exposed. Levi Beebe figured this out with a rock, a fence post, and the moon.
I guess Levi Beebe's techniques shouldn't sound so weird considering we pretty much have a national holiday to folk weather predictions.
We do?
Groundhog Day.
Oh, of course we do.
February 2nd has been a sacred time for thousands of years. It's the halfway point between the winter solstice and the vernal equinox. It's the pagan celebration of Imbolc. The tradition holds that if the weather is nice on that day, the second half of winter would bring storms and cold. And if the weather was stormy or cloudy, spring would arrive early.
That does sound familiar.
Now, when Europeans arrived in America, those who settled the area of western Pennsylvania learned the Delaware Indians considered the groundhog sacred. The animal represented the ancestral grandfather.
So traditions combine, and if the groundhog sees his shadow, he heads back to his burrow for 6 more weeks of winter.
And if he doesn't see his shadow, he stays out. The Punxsutawney Phil groundhog tradition has been going on in western Pennsylvania for over 130 years. So there are still plenty of people who put stock in it.
Has Phil been proven correct?
Well, according to the PennLive.com website for Pennsylvania, when you look at the region around Punxsutawney, Phil has been right about 65% of the time.
Well, that's not bad considering.
Considering Phil is neither a meteorologist or professional broadcaster.
Exactly, and neither was Levi Beebe. Yet, like Punxsutawney Phil, his legend spread beyond his hometown. He wrote weather predictions for newspapers in New York and even National Geographic magazine.
Every few years or so, I'll pick up a farmer's almanac just to see what the coming season will hold. A lot of people know that their prediction formula is a closely guarded secret. Considering the Farmer's Almanac started in 1793, it makes me wonder if Levi Beebe may have tapped into some of the same weather understanding magic through his own observations.
Think about this, Ray. Today we have systems in place to not only predict big storms, but clean up after them. Even the biggest winter storm tends to only shut us down for a day, maybe 2 tops.
But that doesn't stop everyone from running to the store for bread and milk, does it?
No, it doesn't. Back in the time of Levi Beebe, storm preparedness was a matter of life and death, especially for those who were elderly or sick. If a storm hits and you lack the food or fuel to hold up for a few days, or maybe even a week or 2, you can die. You wouldn't be able to help yourself but to listen to Levi Beebe, the weather prophet of Beartown Mountain. If he could give you some insight that increased your chances of survival, you're going to pay attention. Levi Beebe died April 22nd, 1900 at the age of 82. But he left behind this booklet with a roadmap to follow to continue his legacy.
I feel like his booklet and predictions remind us not to get too arrogant with our modern technology and weather predicting software. There's a great deal of wisdom and foresight to be gleaned from studying the world around you. Sometimes we need a reminder in the form of an epic storm.
To see some pictures from the blizzard of 1888 and to listen to this or any of our past New England Legends podcast episodes for free, visit our website at ournewenglandlegends.com.
And we'd like to thank Michael Legge for lending his voice talents this week. Our theme music was composed by John Judd.
Until next time, remember, the bizarre is closer than you think.